My story this morning was about a faithful person that God helped in a specific way. Well, today I'm going to talk about Jacob's son Joseph. And Joseph was faithful, but God kept saying no to his prayers. When his brothers attacked him and put him in the pit, he heard them talking about the Ishmaelite traders that were coming, and they were going to sell him as a slave. And he prayed, please don't let them sell me as a slave. Please, Lord, don't let them do that to me. Slave's life is a pretty terrible life. And you don't know what's going to happen or how your life is going to be. But you are controlled by someone else. You're owned. You're a piece of equipment, your livestock. But God let him be sold as a slave. 20 pieces of silver. His brothers divided that up, 2 pieces of silver apiece. And they told a big lie to their father, and they said, this is Joseph's coat of many colors. It's got blood. We found it in the wilderness. And Jacob tore his clothing. And he mourned. And he mourned. And he said, I'm going to go down into my grave mourning. And so that deceitful lie that they told their father, every day they heard him mourning for Joseph. Meanwhile, Joseph was in that caravan heading for Egypt, and he was praying all the while, deliver me. And I've read that Joseph recognized the territory as they passed within sight of his father's home. But they didn't stop. They probably knew it was his dad. And they didn't want to lose out on their profit. So Joseph ended up in Egypt. And he was purchased by Potiphar. Potiphar was the captain of the king's guard. The palace guard, you might call them. He was in charge of Pharaoh's security. I say Pharaoh. My grandmother and some of the older people I've known in my life always said Pharaoh. Have you heard him called Pharaoh rather than Pharaoh? No, you haven't. Anyway, I'll say it both ways that way. Whichever one is right, at least I've said it. And so Joseph started working at Potiphar's home, and he was faithful. He still worshiped God. He would not worship the idols. And he prayed. But he was faithful in his duties for Potiphar. And Potiphar noticed that. And he noticed that whatever Joseph had a hand in, it went well. And before too long, Joseph was running all of Potiphar's operations. He was in charge of his home. He was in charge of his trade. He was in charge of Potiphar's commerce, whatever he was doing. And Potiphar prospered, and he knew that. Well, Joseph was a good-looking young man, and Potiphar's wife took a liking to Joseph. And her husband was busy with the king's business. And so one day she approached Joseph and wanted him to lie with her. And he said, "How could I sin against Potiphar and against God? How could I do a great wickedness like that?" And so as he started to run, she grabbed his cloak. And that fell off. And so he ran out with just his undergarments on, if he had undergarments in those days. And she started screaming, "Help! Help! Save me! Save me! That Joseph attacked me and was going to molest me." Well, Potiphar was summoned. An accusation like that usually would have a slave end up in the grave. But Potiphar knew Joseph, and Potiphar knew his wife. And yet he couldn't and wouldn't publicly shame his wife. And Joseph was too valuable to put to death. So instead, he was in charge of the king's dungeon, the king's lockup, where the political prisoners were held. I don't know how many slaves were in there, but Joseph was there. And he was treated harshly. And Joseph kept praying, "Lord, deliver me. I'm faithful to you. Please be faithful to me." And God said, "No, you've got to stay there, Joseph." You know, sometimes we get disgusted with God just because He won't heal our ailment, or He won't help us sell our house right away, or He won't help us win the debate. But God is interested in your salvation and in the salvation of many. And God's decision is based on your salvation. Maybe helping you out would lose your salvation. Which would you rather do? Sell your house right away, or be saved and eat from the tree of life? And so Joseph started helping out the jailer, and the jailer found him to be faithful. And he found that whatever he put in Joseph's hands prospered. And it made his work a lot easier. And before long, Joseph was running the entire prison for the keeper of the prison, and that made his job quite easy because he had Joseph to do all the work. And still Joseph was praying. And then one day, some important political prisoners were under arrest. They were accused of being disloyal to the king, disloyal to Pharaoh. One was the king's baker, and one was the king's butler. And he made them very comfortable in the prison amongst the other political prisoners. And it was interesting because both gentlemen, the butler and the baker, had a dream that confused them. And in those days, people look at all the stock in dreams. And the butler shared his dream with Joseph. Out of curiosity, he didn't know Joseph could help him at all. But Joseph was a servant of the Lord, and the butler said his dream was that he had Pharaoh's silver cup and was pressing grapes into it, making wine, fresh wine for Pharaoh. And Joseph interpreted his dream, and he said, in 3 days, Pharaoh's going to restore you to your duties, and you will be Pharaoh's butler again. Well, that cheered up the baker. And the baker shared that he was sifting the wheat. And the birds came along and ate it all up. And he shared his dream with Joseph, hoping for a nice outcome. But Joseph told him, in 3 days, Pharaoh is going to have you hung. And you'll be hung on the tree, and the birds are going to eat your flesh. And it came true, and Joseph told the king's butler, I am innocent of what I was accused of, and I'm wrongly in this prison. Please remember me to Pharaoh and see what you can do for me. Well, it was very convenient for the butler to forget Joseph. After all, Joseph interpreted the dream, but what influence did he have with Pharaoh? What influence could he have in any way? He might end up back in jail again, bringing the king that knowledge. Well, in Genesis 41, it says, and it came to pass at the end of 2 full years. 2 full years. That's over 700 days that Joseph lived in the king's prison. And Pharaoh had a dream, and it puzzled him. And his dream, he says that Pharaoh dreamed, and beheld, he stood by the river, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine, and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke And he slept and dreamed the second time, and behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears, blasted with the cast wind, sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears, and Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. And he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, and all the wise men thereof, and Pharaoh told them his dreams. But there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. All these supposed smart men, wise men, magicians, they couldn't figure it out. Cows? Corn cobs? What's going on? And so finally the chief butler got the courage and told Pharaoh about this man in your prison. And he probably didn't want to remind Pharaoh that a couple years ago I was in trouble and I was in the prison, and the baker was in prison, and he told us our dreams. He interpreted our dreams, and it came true. He told me that in 3 days I would be restored. I'd be making your wine and serving it again. And he told the baker that he would be hanged in 3 days, and he was. Perhaps Joseph can help you. Well, the king sent the palace guard to fetch Joseph from the jail. And the king sent clean raiment for Joseph to put on. I think probably when the guards came, they made him take a quick bath or shower and clean himself up and put on those new clothes. Probably made him shave and fixed his hair. And they did it quickly because, you know what? Pharaoh was in a hurry. Joseph was faithful to God. And I believe God had been faithful to Joseph, even though God kept saying, no, I'm not going to stop your brothers from selling you into slavery. No, I'm not going to let them talk to your dad and maybe sell you to your dad or whatever was going on. No, I'm not going to stop you from being sold in Egypt as a slave. No, I'm not going to punish Potiphar's wife for her big lies. No, I'm not going to stop you from going into the king's prison. No. Personal story. Well, my sister was a new mother with her oldest son. She'd seen all these little kids about 2 years old, and that was their favorite word, was no. You had little kids about 2 years old, what do they say? When you ask them to do something, they say, no! They have power in that word. So my sister was not going to have that, so she deliberately did not say no. Did not say no. And then she was so embarrassed when her son's very first word was, don't. Don't. So you know what she was saying to him. She didn't say no, but she sure said don't. Joseph told him that the 2 dreams had one interpretation. The 7 fat, fit cows and the 7 wonderful, full ears of corn meant 7 prosperous years of bumper crops. Everything was going to be nice and everything was going to be plentiful. And the second dream about the puny, rugged-looking cattle, and that terrible, awful-looking scrub corn, were 7 lean years of famine. And the famine was going to be so severe that the 7 prosperous bumper crop years would be forgotten. And the king inquired, well, what shall we do? What shall we do? And Joseph told Pharaoh, you need to appoint someone who can take charge and build warehouses and provision and take 1/5 of all the bumper crops and put them in storage for those 7 lean years so that your people will not starve. And Pharaoh thought, I'm looking at that man right now. And as we read those Bible verses, there we go. The paper's thin in here. At verse 39, chapter 41, verse 39. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, forasmuch as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Joseph had given God credit for knowing the interpretation of the dream. He took no credit to himself. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried before him, bow the knee. And he made him ruler over all of the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name, changed his name, gave him an Egyptian name, Zapanath-Paneah. And he gave him to wife, the daughter of the priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. 30 years old. And he'd spent nearly half his life as a slave or prisoner. He may have been running the prison, but he had to stay there. I wonder what Potiphar thought when Joseph had this position. I bet he was careful. I bet he was very respectful. Well, to sum things up, Joseph's brothers came during the years of famine because they had heard that there was food in Egypt. They came to buy, but Joseph recognized them and he wanted to see if they had changed. And you know the story, so I'll just shorten it up to say, it ended up with his brothers confessing to Dad what they had done to Joseph. Of course, it was a convenient time for them to tell him because Joseph had sent all these horses and wagons and chariots along with him, and they showed up at Dad's camp with all this equipment, and he had to believe them that Joseph had sent that, and he forgave them. And Joseph brought them to Egypt, and they were given some of the best land, and as part of Joseph's reward, his family were free from tax. And the family was reunited. And Joseph told his brothers when they asked for forgiveness, he said, "Of course I'll forgive you. You meant for harm, but God meant for good." God kept telling me no because he knew this was going to happen. And if it wouldn't have happened, we all might have starved. But you're important to God, and God saved your life. So, we see that power in faithfulness. When God's saying no, don't get mad at him. Praise him. But keep on praying, being persistent. Don't lose your faithfulness because God said no. I don't like people to say no. None of us do. And we don't like it any better when they say don't. God bless each of you. God bless all of you. Thank you for listening.